There's a lot of genres of video games, and obviously the popularities of genres come and go. You don't see many big developers trying to make an MMO nowadays, but it was all the rage after World of Warcraft came out. There's a similar thing going on with live service games right now. Everyone's trying to be Fortnite, but only Fortnite can be Fortnite because it's Fortnite. The lack of 3D platformers over the years really bothered me for most of my life. It just seemed like there weren't very many good ones, at least in comparison to good games in other genres. Even niche genres like turn-based strategies or JRPGs had tons of good stuff to play. With 3D platformers, there were maybe only like a dozen or so at best before you really had to dig deep. And unless your name was Mario or Sonic, they more or less completely disappeared at the dawn of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, which is weird because 2D platformers never died. They definitely went into hibernation during the PS2 and GameCube days, only really having a handful during that time, but that was mainly only a problem on consoles. There were plenty on GBA and DS. 2D games in general were hard to find during the 6th gen, just because 3D was still relatively new territory. They didn't realize that 2D and 3D games could coexist yet, even though, because of handhelds, they already did coexist. But there were a ton of 3D platformers on PS1 and N64, right? What happened? Well, at the dawn of man, when Miyamoto gifted the world with Super Mario Bros., this game laid out the foundation for how to make a video game so well that 2D platformers basically became the default video game genre. Everyone had to have a mascot platformer. Sonic was even made to be a direct competitor to Mario, and they more or less had that same mentality going into the realm of 3D. In order to figure out what worked in 3D, they had to stick to what worked in 2D. But as they figured out what worked in 3D, they found new ways to explore games as a whole. Games like Metal Gear Solid show that they could be more cinematic and tell mature stories. And so, the game industry went through their edgy teen phase. If it wasn't trying to replicate real life, it wasn't worth playing. Like, despite how beloved the GameCube is now, people didn't want to play kids' games. Melee is bad because it doesn't have any blood in it. A real thing that my neighbor actually said to me when I was like 7, and he was probably like 11 at most. Point is, the kids who grew up playing NES and Super Nintendo games are adults and teenagers now. They wanted something made for them. Fair enough. And it's not like there weren't any 3D platformers made around this time. There were plenty of them. I've often heard Donkey Kong 64 credited as the game that killed the genre, but with how many of them were made during the following generation, no. Donkey Kong 64 did not kill 3D platformers. You just didn't like Donkey Kong 64. So people wanted more mature games that didn't look like Wind Waker. A completely insane yet true sentence. But a much bigger factor is that Halo 3 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out. These games were so hilariously good that first-person shooters became the default video game genre. The children didn't want to jump anymore, they wanted to shoot things. Source? Me. By like 4th grade, this was like 2008ish, I was like the only kid that didn't play Call of Duty or Halo. Like, I was talking to this one girl in 6th grade that I was going off about how good Halo is, and fair enough. But here I was like, man, Sonic Colors looks so cool. It didn't help that there weren't many 3D platformers released during this time that weren't Mario or Sonic. And the ones that weren't Mario, or arguably Sonic, weren't received very well. See Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts and Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. The Ratchet & Clank future games are pretty good from what I've heard at least, but no one played the other Ratchet games on PS3. As far as I'm aware, Into the Nexus isn't real. If you played the game, you're probably lying. However, 2D platformers are actually pretty popular around this time. Just look at Super Meat Boy, Rayman Origins, and Donkey Kong Country Returns. NES nostalgia was in full swing back then. People finally realized that 2D and 3D games could coexist. There's plenty of stuff you could do with the new hardware, and they were pretty cheap to make. This isn't an NES Mega Man game. This is Mega Man 9, and it released in 2008, an entire decade after Mega Man 8, which looked like this. So while less mature games were starting to be released, they were outliers. Most of the popular Xbox 360 and PS3 games were T-rated or higher. This mentality even continued into the early PS4 and Xbox One days. People mainly wanted more mature games. Even the good Mario and Sonic games didn't have as much influence as they used to. Galaxy made a big splash in 2007, but 3D World was largely ignored in 2013. Super Mario 3D World is a good game, but it's not the big Mario game people were expecting. To most people, it was a Mario game on Wii U, not the Mario game on Wii U, if that makes any sense. It was something you played if you had a Wii U, but people weren't buying a Wii U to play it, which made people appreciate it more when it came to Switch. They already had Odyssey, it felt like a dessert instead of the main course. I'm running out of ways to describe this. Let's move on to Sonic. Now, the was Sonic ever good debate could be its own separate video that I'm not making, but you do have to realize that Sonic was one of the most recognizable IPs in the world up until 2006, arguably around when Sega went third party a few years earlier. Why Sonic lost relevance around that time is obvious. Sonic has some good games released after 2006, despite what some people will tell you, but it took over a decade for Sonic to be considered good again to most people. So ultimately, when the two biggest names in the genre were losing relevance, it definitely felt like no one wanted to play 3D platformers anymore. But when all seemed lost, 2017 happened. Suddenly, 5 or 6 big ones all came out in the same year. Super Mario Odyssey, Crash N. Sane Trilogy, Yooka-Laylee, A Hat in Time, Snake Pass. Also Sonic Forces, but we don't talk about that one. There were just enough of them released that the genre had a sudden revival and a steady stream of new ones. And people were reminded of how good they are. Even past 2017, we had the likes of Trash 4, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, Psychonauts 2, and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. And those were just the ones from big publishers. But alas, it was a short but sweet resurgence. The releases in this genre are really starting to slow down. Would 3D platformers ever have a proper revival? If you're asking yourself this question, you need to play more video games. It blows my mind that people would be like, 3D platformers are dead because they aren't making a new Crash or Spyro and ignore the myriad of other ones to play. Like, my brother in Christ, have you played A Hat in Time, or Pseudo Regalia, or Demon Turf, or Tori, or Corn Kid 64, or Cow the Kangaroo, or Blue Fire, or Cavern of Dreams, or Spark the Electric Jester 3, or Penny's Big Breakaway, or Super Samurai? Like, dude, do you have any idea how many of these games there are right now? A pretty common theory is why there were relatively few 3D platformers over the years was that it was way harder to get character movement right when you add in a Z-axis. But when you have multiple titles that are mostly made by one person that all have the movement practically perfected, that obviously isn't true. Well, it is true. 3D games are just inherently harder to make than 2D ones, but that's not the big reason why so few 3D platformers were made. And it's just silly to think about in hindsight. Like, I'm not saying that making a 3D platformer is easy, because game development is just hard in general. But if they figure out how to do this on N64 and PS1, why wouldn't they be able to do this with better hardware? It's not like a fundamental game design around it changed that much since then. So to answer the clickbait title of this video, why did 3D platformers die? It's simple. No one wanted to make them. That's it. I could be wrong about the exact reason, but I really can't come to any other logical conclusion. Around the time that 3D platformers really died, first-person shooters and mature games took over the market so much that no one was really interested in making more of them. I feel like you could potentially make something similar to Conker's Bad Fur Day. You know, a 3D platformer aimed at adults. But honestly, the Venn diagram of people who like 3D platformer gameplay and adults was probably pretty small in the 360 days. Making another FPS was probably safer. You know, Assassin's Creed was actually considered risky and innovative when it first came out.
How many big budget games in the past year have not been first-person shooters? You can count them on one hand. When publishers consider that they need to sell over 1 million copies of an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 game to turn a profit, risk is not generally a part of the equation. Shooters are the safe bet these days, and no publisher knows that better than Ubisoft, which is why it's all the more surprising that it went out on a limb with Assassin's Creed, one of the most innovative, imaginative games to be released in years.
With ballooning budgets and smaller profit margins, it was considered a safer move for AAA devs to make another first-person shooter instead. This was 17 years ago, and these problems still persist today. That is wild. But back to the now. You might have noticed that every game I mentioned that you probably haven't played are all indie games. Why are indie games so interested in making 3D platformers all of a sudden? For 3 main reasons. The first one being that there's clearly a 3D platformer market that isn't being satisfied by big publishers. There's only a handful of these games being released by the big guys. A couple seems like a decent sample size, but that's basically all that's being made by bigger publishers. Just compared to the countless live service, open world, and battle royale games being released. 3D platformers are still a rarity by comparison. And honestly, I just don't get it. They're even selling well. At the time of writing this, Sonic Frontier sold around 3.5 million, Trash 4 reportedly sold about 5 million, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart sold almost 4 million, Psychonauts 2 sold at least 1.7 million. The newest number I could find was a few years ago. And Kirby and the Forgotten Land sold about 7.5 million. These games even sell well when they do release. I should clarify that these games obviously aren't doing Call of Duty or Pokemon numbers or anything. They never will. But if you can have multiple games be multi-million sellers without putting Mario in the title, that means there's clearly an audience for it. Like, we have the numbers to back up that people are interested in this kind of game. But presumably, the people up top don't want to try to capitalize on this clear gap in the market. It's such a bizarre anomaly in gaming right now that I don't hear anyone everyone talking about. So if there's an audience for 3D platformers, why would indie developers start making them now? Why not start making them when indies started to gain more steam during the 360 days? Well, that's just it. It wasn't feasible to make a 3D indie game for most people back then. We didn't have the tools that we have now or the publishing freedom that we do now. And that's the second main reason why there's a sudden influx of 3D platformers. 3D development tools are more accessible than ever. Blender is a free and open source 3D modeling tool that's often used by professional animators. Unity is the most popular game engine around, and it's free to start using and pretty cheap if you do end up making money off of it. But Unity is run by the biggest dumbasses on the planet, so if you use Unreal Engine instead, it's pretty much the same deal. At least when it comes to 3D games. I hear that Unreal's 2D capabilities are much to be desired and generally just overkill anyway. And even with these two engines being super cheap, you can still do one better. Godot was completely free and open source, and has pretty competent 3D tools now. It's not quite as good as Unity in terms of 3D, but if you're doing something low poly like most of the 3D indie games coming out, it's probably good enough. Like, if you have a good idea for a 3D platformer, or any game, and a decent computer, you can start making one right now entirely for free. There's a reason why these engines are so popular, especially with indie games. You don't need a bunch of technical know-how to start making a game anymore. You can just start making the actual game. Just look at Undertale. All the dialogue in that game is just a really long switch statement, which, if you don't know what that means, it pretty much just says, if the value you pass into this function is this, then do this. That game's code is full of oddities and weird solutions. Absolute spaghetti code all around. Toby Fox clearly had no idea what he was doing programming this thing, but the game still ended up being fantastic anyway. I don't recommend this. Your life will be so much easier if you do know how to code, but at the very least, you can get started really easily. But none of this means anything if you don't have anywhere to put your game. That's the biggest reason why most indie games start out as PC only. It's completely free to develop for Windows and Linux, and technically Mac if you already have one, but no one's playing games on Mac anymore, so you might as well not even bother. But you obviously need to put it on a storefront. No one's gonna buy a game from some weird shady website unless it's Minecraft. It's actually pretty easy to put a game on Steam. It only costs about $100 to make a developer account. And you don't even necessarily need to do that. Putting up a game on itch.io is completely free as long as the game's under a gigabyte. And some games like Baldi's Basics and Buckshot Roulette manage to blow up without a Steam page. People obviously think of consoles when they think of video games, but people really underestimate the sheer number of people who play games on PC. In 2021, Steam had 132 million active monthly users. For comparison, the Nintendo Switch, the third best-selling video game system of all time, is currently at 140 million units. And those numbers were just monthly users. I'm sure there's bound to be an extra 10 to 20 million that don't play games every single month. I know there's times where I went more than a month without playing a PC game, and that was 3 years ago, which is the newest number I could find. It's probably grown a bit since then. Platforms like Steam and itch give small developers the ability to publish whatever they want, with an audience to make it financially viable. Easy publishing is obviously a double-edged sword. We do get more hidden gems, but we also get way more shovelware. But if the diamonds in the rough have a chance to be successful, then every asset flipping weird-ass porn game is worth it. Without PC being such an easy platform to publish to, we wouldn't have so many surprise hits like Undertale, Stardew Valley, or Minecraft. If any of these games were pitched to a big publisher in their finished form, none of them would have ever been greenlit. This may seem like a big side tangent, but the reason why there's suddenly so many indie 3D platformers is because 3D game dev tools are more accessible than ever, and the big publishers refuse to make more of them. Moderate successes aren't good enough anymore. Like, they're obviously gonna keep making Mario or Sonic and Kirby, but what about Crash, or Spyro, or Ratchet and Clank, or Sackboy, or Psychonauts? Toys for Bob recently alluded to working with Microsoft on a new Spyro game, and yes, working with Microsoft on a new Spyro game is one hell of a sentence. We were living in a very strange timeline. A timeline where Microsoft finally makes a good game with Hi-Fi Rush and then closes the studio that made it a year later. It's very hard to trust anything Xbox related right now. Even with their newer announcements like Perfect Dark and Doom the Dark Ages, it's just hard to trust whether Game Pass will cannibalize all the revenue and they're deemed a failure. And Sony's not satisfied with PS5 sales, so they're trying to improve that by porting Ghost of Tsushima, Forbidden West, and Ragnarok to PC, and only release like 2 new games this year. Okay. Just looking at things from the surface, I can see why so many people think 3D platformers are dead right now. Because without indies, they would be. Not everyone's gonna be up to date on new indie games. A lot of them really have to rely on word of mouth to get anywhere. Shout out to Nitrorad for having seemingly played every 3D platformer ever made. He's basically the only reason why I've heard of most of the games I mentioned today. Especially Pseudo Regalia. That is a very good video game. And you know what? Just as a refresher, here's a bunch of 3D indie platformers I know about that are probably worth playing. I'll be honest, I really need to play more of these. There are way too many games to play right now. But at the same time, it definitely irritates me hearing people say, man, 3D platformers are so dead, when are we getting new Crash or Spyro? And then proceed to not do any research into similar games. It's so easy to just look up new 3D platformers and see what's out there. Even if it's outside your comfort zone, why not try some of them out anyway? What's the harm? You might find something new you like. But hey, that's just part of the fun of making these videos. Shoving weird shit down your throats and exposing you to stuff you wouldn't know about otherwise. So if you take nothing else from this video, play more indie games. They're wonderful. Anyway, it's been fun. Take care, everyone.